This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Shad Hufnagel, Kansas Forest Service Forest Health Coordinator, begins today's show explaining emerald ash borer and how they have identified it in another county in Kansas. The show continues with K-State's Jeff Wichman as he hosts Hope Krebill and Keren Collar on Sound Living as they discuss cancer screenings and how they hope to provide it to more people. K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk ends the show by saying how producers can boost their bottom line by keeping calves healthy as their value has increased. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our show talking about emerald ash borer with Kansas Forest Service Forest Health Coordinator Shad Hufnagel. Shad, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Shelby.
Shad, what is this beetle?
Yeah, the emerald ash borer is it's an exotic invasive insect that originated in Asia and Russia that was originally brought to the United States, likely in the 1990s. However, it wasn't detected until around 2002 around the Detroit area, and it is suspected that the insect arrived in the United States on like shipping cargo and things of that sort inadvertently.
What does this emerald ash borer look like? Is it green?
It is, yeah. As the name would suggest, it is kind of an emerald green color. It does kind of have an iridescent or a kind of a shiny appearance to it. So the adults are fairly small. They're, really no longer than about the diameter of a dime. Fairly slender body shape. Honestly, they're fairly in a kind of an attractive small insect, and they are a flat-headed borer. And that is just one of the life stages. They also have a larva stage where they're not quite as attractive. They are just kind of a creamy white larva, kind of worm-like creature with kind of bell-shaped body segments ranging from about 1 inch to 1.5 inches long. Typically, and fortunately, those are often found just beneath the bark of trees.
What damage can it do, or why do we care so much about where it is?
Well, ash trees are native throughout the vast majority of the United States, including Kansas, where we have white and green ash present in our, rural natural woodlands. And we also have a high volume of ash trees that were planted in our commercial and residential landscapes for decades, due to some of the desirable characteristics of the tree. And I think it's, ash trees are estimated to comprise about 7% of our tree canopy throughout the state, which is estimated to be somewhere between 60 and 70 million ash tree specimens. So knowing that this invasive insect causes, eventual death on host trees, there is, obvious reason for concern as it spreads throughout Kansas. And really the adults, the damage that they cause is fairly cosmetic and inconsequential. The adults feed on foliage of trees, of ash trees specifically. And then the larvae feed on the vascular tissues beneath the bark of the tree, and basically causing the tree not to be able to translocate moisture and nutrients.
How fast does an ash tree go from being a healthy tree to a dead tree?
Yeah, that's a good question. And really the answer is that it kind of varies from specimen to specimen and location to location. So areas where there's high density or, high infestation levels of emerald ash borer, some trees may have more insects attacking it, which obviously would speed up the decline and death process. And then also just the health of the tree will factor into that, the health and size of the tree. So, healthy trees may be able to endure a little bit longer. Larger trees just have more vascular tissue presence, so those may take a little bit longer. But in general, we usually see that most ash trees will slowly decline over a couple of seasons and then generally eventually succumb and, several years later.
Is there a way that people can identify that they have emerald ash borer in their trees by something other than seeing that green little beetle?
Yeah, actually, the green little beetle is not often detected because it is feeding in the, upper canopy of the tree generally, where we don't generally have eyes on those areas or we don't have access to those spaces. And then, of course, the larva stage of the insect is also hard to detect because they're beneath the bark of the tree. So oftentimes what we're looking for is that gradual decline of ash trees, especially when we're seeing it not just in an isolated case, but more widespread ash decline. And generally, it's fairly difficult to detect early on because some of the signs are fairly subtle, and they don't typically occur within a single season. But generally speaking, we're looking for a few things like a declining canopy within the tree, so like foliage loss or maybe some limbs that have some dieback. Also, and as that damage continues to occur within that vascular tissue of the tree, we'll start to see epicormic growth in the form of water sprouts and suckers, which is typically indicative that the tree is undergoing some level of stress. And then later stages, you'll see heavier presence of woodpecker activity because the woodpeckers do feed on these insects and the larvae beneath the bark. And then after the adults emerge in the spring, they will leave a D-shaped exit hole, which is reflective of their body shape.
How is the Kansas Forest Service helping share about emerald ash borer, but also track where it's going?
The Kansas Forest Service definitely recognizes the importance of early detection. And, we do know that emerald ash borer is coming. We've been tracking its spread and presence throughout the state for many years, along with the assistance of Kansas Department of Agriculture and other partners. And so we just realize the economic and ecological impacts that it can cause. And so for a good number of years, we have been installing what we call trap or detection trees in strategic areas throughout the state. This year alone, we had installed 15 trap trees in 11 counties that are adjacent to known infestations. And so in Kansas at this time, we confirmed our 19th county. So we've added 4 counties in 2025.
Is this work that you're going to continue to be doing?
We anticipate doing emerald ash borer detection efforts for quite some time in the future as it continues to spread throughout the state in an effort to get out messaging and awareness and education about the insect and its impacts to communities so that they can be better prepared for when it arrives and hopefully be able to implement management and mitigation strategies and efforts that are suitable for their area and just give them a little bit more time to react and take a little more proactive approach to emerald ash borer and the damage it causes.
Is there anything that people who maybe have quite a few ash trees or even just a few should be doing?
For folks that live in a county or an area where emerald ash borer has been present for quite some time, my hope is that they are aware of this insect, because they've seen the damage that it causes, the death, that widespread ash mortality that's taking place in those areas, and that they've been able to work with area professionals and tree care providers and certified arborists on different strategies for dealing with the presence of this insect, whether that's in the form of tree removals or possibly identifying some trees for chemical treatment against emerald ash borer. And then in the areas where we do not have positive detections, I think that there's almost just equally as much importance on that, because then we can try to allow for time for that more proactive approach. Because when emerald ash borer does eventually make it to an area, which it will if ash trees are present, it will show up, it will attack ash trees, unprotected ash trees, and then they will eventually decline and die. And so there is an economic burden, as mentioned earlier, when we have widespread, ash mortality or any species for that matter. Tree removals are costly. And then also, identifying trees that if there are some that have site or sentimental value that, or maybe are part of an arboretum or, again, have some sort of historical significance, maybe those would be good candidates, especially if they're in good condition for control. And then also, as emerald ash borer feeds on host trees, those trees are rendered more hazardous due to that feeding, making removals harder at a later stage.
If people do have good trees and they're really wanting to maintain them, is there something they can do?
Yeah, fortunately, despite all the, doom and gloom associated with emerald ash borer, there is a little bit of hope that in the fact that we can protect ash trees. It's protection of chemically protecting all ash trees is probably not a very realistic goal, just because of the volume of the trees and the location of the trees and the condition of the trees. But certainly there will be specimens that are in good enough condition that would and also have some sort of value to communities or homeowners and landowners where they'd want to protect them. And so there are different chemical treatments available, ranging from basal treatments, soil injections, as well as systemic insecticide injections, which tend to be the most effective. And then certainly those control techniques would need to be administered by certified arborists and tree care providers.
If people want to find out more information about the emerald ash borer, how can they do that?
Probably the best way for folks to, keep up with emerald ash borer findings throughout the state is to, just continue to be engaged with their local extension offices for one, and then also our Kansas Forest Service website. We do maintain a map. And then we also have social media posts, our Kansas Canopy newsletter that goes out that has information on a wide array of forestry related activities and things of that sort. But also, detections would certainly be mentioned in those newsletters.
Shad, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thanks, Shelby. Good to talk to you again.
That was Kansas Forest Service Forest Health Coordinator Shad Hufnagel. If you would like to check out the Kansas Forest Service website, you can do so by going to kansasforest.org. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show with part of a Sound Living podcast episode, which is hosted by K-State's Jeff Wichman as he discusses boosting cancer screening.
Kansas State University Extension and the University of Kansas Cancer Center have launched a partnership aimed at increasing awareness, access, and participation in cancer screenings, especially in rural and underserved areas of the state. On today's Sound Living, boosting cancer screening statewide. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman. Hope Krebill, Executive Director of the Masonic Cancer Alliance, the Outreach Network of the University of Kansas Cancer Center, and Keren Collar, Associate Director and Psychosocial Services Director for the MCA, say the collaboration with K-State Extension will focus on bringing education, resources, and screening opportunities directly into Kansas communities through a network of local extension offices. Hope, maybe some background on some of the prevalent cancers in Kansas and some of these pocket areas?
So the most common cancers in Kansas are ones that we can prevent or screen for. So prostate, breast, lung, colorectal, and melanoma cancer, they're all things we can do something about. Pockets are a harder question and really difficult to answer because it really depends on what we're specifically asking. We know that cancer incidence is lower in rural communities, but the mortality is higher. We also know that both cancer incidence and mortality is higher in southeast Kansas. If we looked at specific cancers, it may be different. For example, breast cancer incidence is about the same across our state. Some areas a little higher, some areas a little lower, but we know that rural women and Black women are more likely to die of that cancer. So I hate to just talk about individual communities. I like to think about specific cancers and the impact that they may have for your community.
So that's really why statewide screening then becomes extremely important, right?
It really is. And that's part of how we think about statewide screening. When we look at our state, we go to multiple data sources, one of them being KDHE has a great cancer data dashboard. And we look to see where we expect cancers to be higher. We look to see where the outcomes tend to be worse. And really, I'm more interested in the outcomes being worse. What can we do there? Sometimes you see higher cancer incidence because screening's happening, and so they're catching the cancers. So we use that information to decide where we're going to do our cancer screenings, and we also partner with local communities to put on these cancer screening events.
Can you talk about the importance, Keren, maybe of early detection? I think we all know what that is, but from a standpoint of, I guess, maybe the medical side of it, why is it so important that we do these screenings?
The beauty of a cancer screening right now is that there are screenings like the ones that Hope just mentioned that we can screen for so we can find them early. And when we find a cancer early, it is much more likely to be treatable and survivable. Even when we think about, people toss around a word like cure, it's much more likely to happen when we find it early. And so that regular screening schedule is really important so that we are more likely to find it early, and it's more likely then to be treatable. And then the treatment usually is not as hard, right? So it's not just that people will survive it, but it's also that the treatment isn't as long, it isn't as difficult or as arduous. And when people move out of their cancer treatment and into survivorship, life isn't as difficult.
Talk a little bit maybe more in depth about the screening process. How does this work? I'm assuming it's different for what you're screening for, but in general, how does it work?
I think the first thing is we always encourage people to work with their individual physician to determine when they should personally begin cancer screenings. And you can engage with your physician, or you can go to one of our cancer screening events where we provide cards that we send home that you collect some information from your personal stools, and then you send that in and we test that for you and give you the results. But others may decide they want to go to the physician and have a colonoscopy. Then you only need to do that every 10 years compared to the FIT kit that I mentioned, which is every year. And so that's one approach that we work with to get people screened either with us at a cancer screening event or engage with their local physician and get regular screenings on the timeline that you and your physician have decided are important for you.
Do you have some recommendations for people who want to reduce their cancer risk? What are some things that they should be thinking about?
One of the things that we're seeing right now is that tobacco is the leading cause of cancer. So obviously, if you're smoking, really working to reduce that and quit. And through the Masonic Cancer Alliance, we offer tobacco cessation classes that are virtually as well as texting. So that would be my first thing is if you're using tobacco, let's help you quit. The other thing that we're starting to see is this greater risk of obesity-related cancers, and we believe that those obesity-related cancers will outstrip the tobacco-related cancers soon. The other thing could be also genetic testing and counseling. So if you have a family that has a family history of cancer, finding out if you should get a genetic test. With that, you might find out you should start getting screened earlier for some cancers or do things that could potentially prevent those cancers.
When you know someone is going through cancer treatments, that can be difficult to know how you're supposed to act, how you're supposed to treat people. Is that another thing that you can pass along a little bit of information on?
Definitely. If you know somebody in your life who's had a cancer diagnosis and you aren't sure how to reach out, I think just starting by asking them what they need is a really great place to start. Some people are really private and don't want to talk about it a lot, but even then, saying, what can I do? And knowing that part of the burden really is a caregiver as well. So sometimes the person who's going through cancer treatment, that's hard, but often they have the support that they need, but their caregiver, so their spouse or their parent or child who's having to manage going to work and taking care of maybe their own household and providing that support, often they're the ones who need the support too. And so reaching out to them to say, what can I take off your plate? When can I come over and sit with, your mom, or can I do this or that? I think that those are really important conversations, and making that offer and knowing that everybody's going to be a little bit different, I think is really important. And then, like you say, when we think about survivorship, we know that even after somebody has completed treatment, cancer isn't usually done with them yet, unfortunately, right? So even when somebody's, okay, I had my last treatment, I think a lot of times people feel that relief, like, thank goodness I'm finished. I don't have to go back to chemo, or I'm done with radiation and now I can get back to normal. And what people tend to find pretty quickly is that normal, the old normal, isn't back yet. And maybe it never comes back. Not because life can't be wonderful again, but life might still be different again.
And being able to talk to someone about this in your local community has got to be helpful.
Yeah, so that's one of the things we're really excited about connecting with Extension, because they are connected to people. They probably know who has cancer in their community. They probably have people that are talking to them about it privately or as friends. And we have a training that we are planning on offering to the extension staff that are interested in attending around survivorship care. We have a care plan. It's really kind of like your automobile manual of how to take care of yourself after cancer. And so we are making those available to the extension office. The piece that's important with that is that we also make sure that we share a little information about what is cancer, how does it develop, and how does the time in survivorship impact that individual. And everybody will be different, but just being able to provide some information to the extension staff across the state will really benefit all.
The only thing that I would say is that we've just touched the tip of the iceberg when we think about the ways that we can think about cancer prevention and cancer screening. And so I think for people to continue to have those conversations with their provider so that as things change, they are up to date on what they need to know, because we know that cancer is a disease of the aging. And so kind of continuing to have that conversation, like, what do I need to be doing, is going to be important.
And I would encourage people to not wait for their provider to have that conversation with them. I would say that you need to say, hey, what cancer screenings do you think I'm due for right now? But definitely, if you see something different, let your doctor know, and definitely ask about what you're due for cancer screenings.
How can people get more information?
The first thing is, I would say, follow our Facebook page, because if you look at the Masonic Cancer Alliance Facebook page, you will see when we're doing cancer screenings, and you'll get up-to-date, quick information. Of course, we have a web page, www.masoniccanceralliance.org. I would also like to mention some national resources that I think are particularly good for cancer information, family history and cancer. I would go to www.cancer.org. I also think about AICR.org, which has really great information about healthy living and how to make some good choices related to that for cancer prevention. And then finally, if you're not a web person, and not everybody is, we have our own phone number, which is 1-877-253-4477, and we'd be happy to get back with you. Or you can call 1-800-4-CANCER, which is the National Cancer Institute's Cancer Information Service, and they have trained information specialists that can answer that call as well.
That's Hope Krebill, Executive Director of the Masonic Cancer Alliance, the Outreach Network of the University of Kansas Cancer Center, and Keren Dennis-Collar, Associate Director and Psychosocial Services Director for the MCA, with information on boosting cancer screenings statewide.
Once again, that was K-State's Jeff Wichman hosting Sound Living. If you'd like to hear the full podcast episode, I will link it in today's show notes on agtoday.net. You can also find it by going to ksre.k-state.edu or by searching for Sound Living on your favorite podcast platform. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wichman. We end today's program with this week's milk lines. There's been a big shift in how dairy producers view bull calves and crossbred calves on the farm because the value of the calves has increased significantly over the last 18 months. K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk says that about 25% of the total revenue on the dairy might be associated with the sale of bull calves and high-value heifers and bull calves being produced on the farm.
Today I want to visit with our Kansas dairy producers concerning the value of calves in their dairy operations. You know, bull calves in our operations used to be seen probably, at least in many cases, as a problem rather than a solution. But here in the last year and a half or so, it's really become a solution for many of our dairy herds. As we look at the price of calves, and especially if we look at those crossbred calves that we're producing now on our dairies, they've risen from about $225 per calf in late 2022 to maybe almost $1,500 today. So quite a change, and it has quite an impact on the overall economics on our dairy. You know, as we look at how much beef semen we're using on our dairies today, if you go back a couple of years, you probably weren't using a lot, maybe a little bit. Today, maybe as much as 65% of the inseminations that we do on a dairy might be with beef semen, depending on what we're doing with sex semen for the animals that we want to keep back as heifers and bring into our breeding herd. But it could be as high as 65% of our breedings in our herd. So when you think about this produces a lot of calves, and it really changes the economics on our dairies. Another thing that's going on in our dairies is, we're actually increasing the size of our dairy herd. We're doing that largely because we're doing less culling, not because we have an oversupply of heifers out there that we're bringing into our operations. As we look at what's happening to culling over the last 5 years or so, we're probably sending about 20% fewer cows to market as culls. But the price of those animals has greatly increased. In fact, when we look at the revenue that we get for a cull cow today compared to what it was 2-3 years ago, it might be as much as almost 80% or 90% more than what it used to be. So what does that mean to our bottom line? When we convert everything to a per hundredweight basis, what does it actually mean for the total dairy? Well, those cull sales used to account for about $1 to $1.50 per hundredweight of the milk that we actually sold off the dairy. Today, it's probably closer to $2 or maybe $2.50 a hundredweight. You combine into that with the value that we've gained on calves, and it's really impressive. Calves used to only account for about 50 cents per hundredweight on our revenue, but today that might be as high as $3.50 to $4 per hundredweight of milk that we ship. So in total, what does this mean? Well, it means that about 25% of our total revenue on the dairy farm today might be associated with the sale of cull cows as well as the sale of those high-value heifers and bull calves that we're producing on our farms. So, hint to the wise, these animals are going to continue to be worth a lot. So we need to keep them alive, make sure we get a chance to sell them. So all of those things that we do around calving to ensure that the animals get the correct amount of colostrum and dried off and cared for right after birth are very, very important to make sure that we have healthy calves to sell. Keeping in mind that is very important to our bottom line as we move forward. As we look at the forecast for milk price going into 2026, maybe the bright spot will be our ability to sell cull cows as well as these crossbred calves that we're producing for the beef industry. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairy farmers to consider the value of calves and cull cows on their farm.
Thanks, Mike. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wichman. This is the K-State Radio Network.